You'd be amazed how fast a lifetime of love can get erased when your usefulness runs out. No dramatic fights, no shouting, just soft smiles, camera phones, and carefully worded thank yous that don't actually include your name. That's how it starts. That's how I got blindsided. My name is Carolyn Foster. I'm 67 years old, and this is not the revenge story you're probably expecting. There's no courtroom drama, no viral video where I scream at my son. Just quiet details, a birthday dinner, a gift I didn't ask for, and a decision I made that they never saw coming. So if you're sitting there thinking, I'd never let that happen to me, you'd be surprised, because neither did I. You know, when you're a mother, especially from my generation, you're taught to give without keeping score. And for the most part, I didn't. I gave because I wanted to, not because I expected anything in return. Not a thank you, not a parade, not even a decent text on Mother's Day. I didn't need it, or at least I convinced myself I didn't. I was married to Harold for 38 years. We were teachers. He taught science, I taught history. Our house was nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms built in the late 60s, one of those units with squeaky floorboards, and a balcony that creaked every time the wind blew. But it was ours. We bought it together when interest rates were brutal and the roof leaked every time it rained. We patched it up year by year, month by month, and we never called it an investment. It was our home. After Harold passed 10 years ago, I stayed. Not just because of the mortgage we'd paid off, though that helped, but because the walls still whispered with memories. I could still hear his laugh in the hallway, still see the grooves on the bookshelf he built with his own hands. Ethan, our only son, grew up there. He was the kind of boy who called me Mama until he was 15, who cried when his dog died, who hugged me at graduation and whispered, "I'll never forget what you did for me." I believed him. He lost his scholarship during sophomore year. 1 phone call, 2 minutes, and I wired him the full semester's tuition. No questions asked. I even helped him buy a used car for his first job interview. When he got engaged to Haley, I handed him Harold's wedding ring, told him it had built something worth believing in. He smiled, kissed my cheek, called me his rock. And when their wedding went over budget, guess who helped cover the catering deposit? The flowers? Half the honeymoon fund? Me. Again. Quietly. Willingly. Because I believed that's what mothers do. We fill in the cracks so our children can stand taller. Haley was always polite, at least on the surface. She's the kind of girl who never shows up empty-handed, but somehow still makes you feel like a guest in your own home. The kind who hugs you but holds her purse between your bodies. There was always a camera near her face, always something recording. I chalked it up to her being a different generation. I didn't question it. They visited less after the wedding. At first, once a week, then once a month, then birthdays and holidays, if that. But I didn't take it personally. I figured they were just building their own rhythm. That's what I told myself. I still cooked extra portions on Sundays just in case they stopped by. I kept his old room neat, never rented it out, never repurposed it. There was a comfort in preserving things, in believing that what I gave still meant something to someone. I just never thought I'd become the inconvenience they wanted to clear out. The truth is, I never minded being alone. Not really. I minded being forgotten. There's a difference. Loneliness can be quiet, but being forgotten feels like noise that nobody hears. You start to feel like wallpaper in a home you paid for. Pretty maybe, but useless. It never occurred to me that Ethan saw me as part of a future plan that didn't include me. 1 week before my 67th birthday, he texted asking if I was free for dinner. I smiled. Haley picked the place. One of those trendy, dimly lit spots with reclaimed wood walls and cocktails served in mason jars. I put on lipstick for the first time in months. I even wore my old red earrings, the ones Harold said made me look fierce. I thought maybe they had something sweet planned. A slideshow, a card with too many stickers, a toast, something that said, "We see you. We remember." I never guessed that the gift would be something they decided I had already agreed to give, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Back then, all I knew was this. I had spent nearly 4 decades pouring myself into the cracks of this family, financially, emotionally, physically, and never once stopped to ask what would happen when I ran out. I just assumed love would loop back, that kindness would echo. Turns out sometimes the echo never comes. Sometimes the people you gave everything to are the first ones to write you out when they think the ink won't smudge. But not this time. There's a silence that only happens in restaurants like that, after a toast, just before the food comes, when people are waiting for the next big moment. That's the exact moment my son stood up, tapped his spoon against a wine glass, and made my world tilt. Ethan raised his glass like he was giving a wedding speech. Before we dig in, I just want to thank my mom, not just for tonight, but for everything she's done over the years, really. He looked around the table. Friends, extended family, Haley's co-workers, people who knew me only as Ethan's mom. Then he turned back to me with that rehearsed little grin. She's been so generous, especially now that she's letting us move into her condo. There it was, simple, sharp, and delivered like I'd already signed the papers and handed over the keys. The table went still, a beat of confused smiles, then clapping. My fingers tightened around my fork. My mouth opened just slightly. My throat didn't work. I turned to him slowly. "I'm sorry, what?" Haley giggled, yes, giggled, and slid a gift bag across the table toward me. "Happy birthday, Carolyn. We just figured since everything's moving forward already, we'd make it official tonight." I pulled the tissue paper back and stared at what was inside. A baby onesie, gray with white lettering. "Best grandma ever." I blinked. My stomach flipped. "You're pregnant?" She placed a perfectly manicured hand on her stomach. "We wanted it to be a surprise. We're still early, but yes." Her eyes sparkled. "And your place? It's just perfect for a nursery. We thought it made sense." Before I could respond, Ethan jumped back in. "We've already started sketching out where the crib will go. Don't worry. We'll keep your plants on the balcony." The words, "your place," echoed in my ears like a dare. Not our place, not their future. Mine, but spoken about like it was already theirs. Haley pulled out her phone, recording. I saw the red light blinking. The angle was perfect. My reaction framed just right. And I nodded. It wasn't a yes. It wasn't even a maybe. It was reflex. Because the entire table had turned their heads toward me, because the camera was rolling, because my own son was smiling at me like I was the star of a show I hadn't auditioned for. I smiled too. Small, tight, I said nothing. The dinner moved on. I didn't. I cut my steak, chewed, nodded along as Haley talked about color swatches and replacing the outdated curtains. I sat through dessert while she showed Pinterest boards labeled Modern Neutral Baby Room. Ethan chuckled and said, "Don't worry, Mom. You'll still be able to visit." Haley added, "We'll even leave your teapot if you want." Have you ever felt invisible while sitting in the middle of your own life? That's what it was. I wasn't part of the conversation. I was the obstacle they'd already planned around. Halfway through dessert, I excused myself. Ethan called after me, "Are you okay?" I didn't answer. I walked. 3 blocks in stiff heels, cold air slicing at my face. My knees ached. My hands shook. It wasn't just what they said, it was how easy it was for them to say it. How natural it seemed to give away a home I built, loved, bled into. When I got home, the apartment felt foreign, smaller somehow, like I was already a guest in it. I turned the key 3 times in the lock before I felt sure it was still mine. I stood in the living room, my husband's old bookshelf to my left, the wall with the crack he patched himself behind me, and I heard Ethan's voice in my head again. "You don't need all this space anymore." They hadn't asked. They'd decided, announced, celebrated, and I hadn't said no. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where someone thanked you for something you never actually gave? Like they carved your silence into consent? If that's ever happened to you, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments, even if it's just 1 sentence. Because if you've ever been made to feel like your value expired quietly, I promise you, you're not alone. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat in the kitchen with the lights off, the baby onesie still in the gift bag on the table, and I tried to make sense of how the people I'd raised had so cleanly pushed me out of the frame. The next morning, I found the email, subject line, transition timeline. It came from Ethan's email, said to Haley, a PDF with bullet points, move-out dates, suggested storage services. Feel free to take any sentimental items, but large furniture will be rehomed. Haley's note, I'm thinking linen beige for the walls. What do you think? Below it all, a link to a Pinterest board labeled Minimalist Serenity Nursery. It wasn't a conversation. It was a spreadsheet. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was a project. I closed the laptop and walked over to the drawer where I kept old documents, insurance files, Harold's death certificate, Ethan's college records, and there, slipped between two manila folders, was a copy of a power of attorney form. I'd signed it 2 years ago during a bout of pneumonia. Ethan had brought it to the hospital, told me it was just in case. My signature was on the line, and I hadn't revoked it. My hands went cold. If they could convince someone, a doctor, a lawyer, anyone, that I was slipping, that I was confused, they could challenge my capacity to make decisions. And if they had that, they could take it all. I stared at the form, heart pounding, and knew this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a strategy. They weren't hoping I'd hand it over. They were building a reality where I already had. And I'd let them. I didn't sleep that night, not even a minute. I sat in the dark on my couch, wrapped in a blanket like armor, listening to the silence press against the windows. Every second played back in my head like a reel I couldn't stop. Haley's smile, Ethan's voice announcing my home as if it were his, that blinking red light on her phone catching my hesitation. My nod, the way the whole room clapped like I'd just handed over a ribbon-wrapped gift instead of a roof over my head. I wanted to scream, but there was no one to scream to. And even if there were, I didn't have the words. It wasn't rage I felt. It was grief. Not the kind you feel when someone dies, worse. The kind that comes when you realize you've been slowly erased by the very people you loved the most. By morning, I was still on the couch. The apartment looked different now. Or maybe I was seeing it clearly for the first time. The cushions were a little flat, sure. The curtains were older than I like to admit. But it was mine. Every scuff on the floor told a story. Every picture on the wall had a heartbeat behind it. This wasn't just a place. It was the last piece of me that hadn't been repurposed. And yet, the feeling hung over everything like fog. They're already acting like it's theirs. I opened my laptop to check email. The top message was from Haley. Subject line, "Look what we made." Attached was a link. I clicked. It was a video. Soft piano music. Slow pans of my living room. My couch. My lace curtains. The bookshelf Harold built with his hands. A warm Instagram filter over everything. And Haley's voice narrating, "This is the beginning of our family's next chapter. A cozy space for our little one, thanks to a very special woman." My name wasn't mentioned once, not even Mom, just a very special woman. 37 comments had already rolled in. "You're so lucky." She must be thrilled to pass it down. "This baby is already so loved." Loved? I felt hollow. I stared at the screen, unable to move, until I heard the ping of another message. It was from Ethan. Subject line, "Transition plan, updated inside, a revised move-out schedule, photos of my bedroom stripped to a neutral color palette, suggestions for where I might store seasonal items. A polite clinical breakdown of how I could disappear from my own life. One bullet point even read, optional, remove sentimental decor by 3:15. Optional, how kind." The next few days blurred. I didn't leave the apartment, didn't cook, barely drank anything but cold coffee and tap water. I walked from room to room like a ghost inside my own story. One afternoon, I opened the hallway closet to find my sewing kit. I didn't need it. I just needed to know something I loved was still there. Inside, I saw the old photo albums. Ethan in Little League, our trip to the lake, Harold in his workshop. I pulled one down and flipped through it on the living room floor. The pages felt heavier than I remembered. Every photo had one thing in common, me, holding the camera, setting the scene, baking the cake, patching the scraped knees. Always there, always behind the scenes, and now I wasn't even part of the credits. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. I looked tired, not sick, not fragile, just worn down in a way no filter could fix. I whispered out loud, "You gave them everything." The reflection didn't answer. A few days later, a plain manila envelope slid under my front door. No knock, no heads up, just the soft whisper of paper on tile. Inside, a preliminary transfer agreement, residential property. My name typed neatly at the top as the grantor. Ethan and Haley listed as grantees. The only thing missing, my signature. Tucked behind it was a note in Ethan's handwriting. Tight, cold. No rush. Just need this signed before Friday to meet bank requirements. Thanks again, Mom. Bank requirements. So they weren't just dreaming. They were already using my name, my address, my home to get money. Possibly even a second mortgage, leveraging my existence like a line item. I gripped the edge of the kitchen table until my fingers ached. I didn't remember agreeing to this. I didn't remember any conversation where I said, "Sure, go ahead and take everything." But there it was, in ink, in spreadsheets, in a timeline I hadn't been invited to, and that's when the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. They weren't just assuming I'd say yes. They were building a story where I already had. I wasn't Carolyn anymore. I was an elderly woman who had generously passed down her property. I was background. I was useful until they finished the nursery, and in all of it, they had given me the greatest insult of all. They believed I would stay quiet. I took the documents, shoved them into a drawer, and locked it. Then I sat in the dark again, the envelope like a bruise in the back of my mind. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a list. I wrote down every single thing I had paid for in Ethan's adult life. Tuition, wedding, car, emergency loans. Every time I'd answered the phone and said, "Don't worry, I've got it." Line by line, I accounted for my worth. Not to be paid back, but to be recognized. When I finished, I looked at the total and didn't feel proud. I felt used. And the worst part, I'd let it happen. Out of love, out of habit, out of that deeply carved belief that mothers are supposed to be needed. But love doesn't mean being erased. And I was done watching my name disappear. The first real crack came on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day where nothing feels urgent, but everything feels off. I was folding laundry when the doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity? That's a stubborn thing. It was Haley. Of course it was. Hair curled like she was headed to a photo shoot, holding a white gift bag in one hand and an iced coffee in the other. My name was scrawled across the plastic cup in her usual handwriting, messy and performative. "Hi, Carolyn," she chirped like we were best friends. "I was just in the neighborhood and figured I'd swing by." Without waiting, she stepped through the doorway. I opened my mouth to protest, but didn't. I just stepped back. 1 second. That's all it took. She walked in like it was already hers, like I was the one visiting. "Brought your favorite," she said, dangling the drink in front of me. "Hazelnut, extra ice, no sugar." She got that part right, I'll give her that. "I know things have been moving fast," she said, setting the gift bag on the kitchen counter. "We're just so grateful. Ethan and I feel like it's all coming together." I stayed quiet. She opened a can of sparkling water from my fridge and took a long sip, bubbles and all. I watched her, something in my gut twisting. "You know," she added, walking through the apartment, touching everything like a real estate agent mid-tour. "I'm thinking we knock this wall out, open concept, more light for the baby." She didn't ask. She stated, like I had already moved out, like this wasn't the room where I sat with Harold every Sunday morning for 30 years, like my life had already been erased and replaced with paint swatches and Pinterest boards. She paused at the bookshelf, ran her fingers across the top. "This one's a bit outdated, huh?" she said, like it was a compliment. "We'll probably donate it." Outdated. That was the word. That was what I'd become. I nodded slowly. "Let me grab something from the bedroom," I said. I walked down the hall, paused outside the door, and waited until I heard her humming softly to herself. When I stepped back into the kitchen, she was in the living room scrolling on her phone. Her purse sat open on the counter, wide open. And there it was. Not cash, not makeup, not even a phone charger. A manila folder, tucked halfway under her planner. I could see the edge of a floor plan sticking out, a real estate layout. I glanced toward the hallway. She was distracted, still scrolling. I reached in and slid the folder out just far enough to see what was inside. It wasn't just a layout. It was my apartment, labeled and color-coded. Furniture tagged, replace with neutral. Stage with minimal decor. Nursery corner. On the back, a printed page from Zillow with an estimated market value circled in pink pen. They weren't moving in. They were flipping it. And I was just the middle step. Haley came back into the kitchen and didn't even notice my hands had been in her bag. She sipped her drink and talked about baby names, color palettes, and how I had such a good eye for antiques. Maybe I could help pick nursery furniture. I nodded. I smiled. I didn't ask questions. I just filed it all away. They never wanted to raise a baby here. They wanted to raise a profit. Later that evening, I sat on the couch and went through the photos I had taken with my phone when she wasn't looking. I started a new folder, labeled it Proof, and uploaded every file. I stared at the Zillow estimate, at the little hearts beside listings she had saved. They were planning to sell the place before I'd even packed a sock. I wasn't just being erased. I was being leveraged. And that was the moment I woke up. I opened my filing cabinet and began pulling out everything. My deed, my will, old insurance policies, copies of checks I'd written for Ethan over the years. I pulled out a lockbox I hadn't touched in a decade. Inside, Harold's old pension documents, our original purchase agreement for the apartment, and every tax record I'd saved since 1998. By the time the sun set, my dining table was covered in paper and truth. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel afraid. I felt focused. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Annette. We hadn't spoken in months. She picked up after 2 rings. I need to revoke a power of attorney, I said. My voice was steady. There was a pause. Whose name is on it? She asked. Ethan. Another pause. Then a rustle of paper on her end. You need to come in today, she said. Bring everything. I did. I dressed like I was going to court, pressed slacks, a white blouse, flats that made noise on hardwood floors. I brought every folder, every photo, every scrap of proof. Annette flipped through the documents, her eyes hard and unreadable. They're moving quickly, she said, tapping the Zillow printout. They're banking on you staying quiet. Well, I said, that bank is about to be overdrawn. She looked at me. For the first time since I walked in, she smiled. That night, I slept. Not well, but enough. And when I woke up, I didn't feel like a mother scrambling to be loved. I felt like a woman with a plan. The hardest part wasn't realizing what they were trying to do. It was pretending I didn't know. For 3 days, I responded to Ethan's text with short, cheerful replies. A thumbs up emoji here, a sounds good there. I commented on Haley's Instagram story about paint samples with a smiley face. I even reposted an old photo of my lasagna with the caption, "Home cooking always hits different." Let them believe I was clueless. Let them think the plan was unfolding right on schedule. The more confident they felt, the less they looked over their shoulders. Meanwhile, I was unraveling everything behind the scenes. Annette worked fast. By Thursday, the power of attorney was officially revoked. Ethan no longer had any legal authority over my decisions. We filed the paperwork through her network quietly. No notices, no alerts, just clean lines and sealed envelopes. I also froze my credit, canceled old cards, changed every password, from my email to my electric bill. I opened a new bank account and moved my savings, every dollar, out of the joint accounts they'd once had access to in case of emergency. I wasn't scared. I was surgical. And the thing is, once you start clearing space, for truth, for boundaries, you realize how cluttered your life had become with noise you didn't ask for. Their opinions, their expectations, their made-up timelines for your future. I started packing, not boxes, but evidence, receipts, photos, text threads. I kept a journal documenting everything: what time Haley texted, what Ethan said in that email, how I felt when I saw their video reach over 10,000 views. The more I wrote, the more grounded I felt, like I was becoming visible again, if only to myself. Then I called Nancy. We hadn't spoken in a year, maybe 2. She used to be a top real estate agent before she retired to open a vintage shop downtown. I asked if she still had connections. She said, "Not only do I have connections, I have people who don't ask stupid questions and pay cash." That was all I needed. "No public listing," I said. "No open house. I want it sold without a whisper." She chuckled. "Carolyn, you're speaking my language." By the weekend, she had a buyer, a widower named Roger. Kind eyes, cash in hand, looking to downsize. We arranged for a quiet showing. He loved the place. The deal moved fast. By Sunday night, we were in escrow. While Ethan was asking if I needed help measuring curtains, I was signing closing documents with a notary in my kitchen. On Monday, I wired a down payment on a cabin 2 states away. Nothing glamorous, just a small place by a lake with a crooked mailbox and a porch that needed work, but it was mine. No one else had opinions about the paint color or where the nursery should go. The seller, a retired veteran named George, shook my hand and said, "You're gonna like it here. Nobody bothers you." I smiled for the first time in weeks. And back home, I called in Frank from church. He had a pickup truck and a serious allergy to drama. I paid him cash to help move my husband's tools, the photo albums, my sewing machine, and every piece of furniture I wasn't ready to let go of. We drove it to Nancy's storage unit. No one saw us. No one knew. At night, I sat at my kitchen table and read the same sentence from Ethan's transition plan over and over again. "We'll give her plenty of time to move." I smiled. "Oh, honey, I'm already gone." The last thing I did was update my emergency contacts. I walked down to the building office, filled out the form, and removed Ethan's name. I replaced it with Nancy's. The manager blinked when he saw the change. I didn't explain. I didn't owe him one. Then I went home, packed a small overnight bag, and left it by the door, just visible enough for Haley to notice the next time she dropped by uninvited. Let her think I was packing for a short trip. Let her tell Ethan. Let them relax. What they didn't know was that I'd already forwarded my mail to a P.O. box in another state. My new address was registered, my name, removed from everything that tied me to this apartment except the title, and even that would be gone in less than 72 hours. On Thursday afternoon, I received the confirmation email from the title company. Sale closing set for Monday. No delays, no contingencies. The apartment would no longer be mine. And yet, for the first time, I felt like I truly owned it. Not the walls or the floors, but the choice. The choice to leave on my terms. That night, I walked through every room and said goodbye. To the spot where Harold used to hum while he washed dishes. To the couch where Ethan took his first steps. To the window where I sat watching snow fall when Haley didn't call me back for 3 days after the wedding. Not with tears, not with bitterness. With clarity. This wasn't surrender. This was reclamation. By the time I lay in bed, I'd scheduled the utility shutdown, filed the change of address with the DMV, and booked a motel for 2 nights near the cabin. All that was left was the keys, and I wouldn't be handing them to Ethan. I wouldn't even tell him I was gone. He'd find out when his key didn't fit, when the apartment echoed back his footsteps like a stranger's, when he finally realized the silence he counted on wasn't compliance, it was strategy. And by then, I'd be long gone. Ethan showed up 2 days after I left. I know this not because he told me, of course. He didn't. I found out through the building manager, Mr. Delaney, who left me a voicemail. Low, confused, a little amused. Carolyn, just so you know, your son came by. Seemed pretty surprised you were gone. Thought maybe you went out for groceries. But, he had a key. Didn't work. Looked pretty upset. I listened to the message twice, then deleted it. I could picture it perfectly. Ethan fumbling with the key, then trying the doorbell, calling my phone, already changed, asking the neighbors. Haley pacing the hallway in those expensive heels, cursing the humidity for her frizzy hair and wondering why I didn't answer. Maybe they called the bank next. Maybe they pulled up Zillow and saw it listed as sold. Maybe, for the first time, they realized I was no longer part of the picture they painted, and I wasn't going to be. By the time they arrived, I was already settled in the cabin. It smelled like pine and old books. The windows needed scrubbing. The water heater made a noise like it had opinions, but it was quiet. The kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. Not empty, peaceful. I planted lavender by the porch, hung wind chimes from a hook Harold would have rolled his eyes at. I repainted the kitchen cabinets myself, a little crooked, but mine. And every morning I took my coffee out to the back steps and listened to the birds argue in the trees like old friends. Some evenings, I thought about calling Ethan, just to say, I know what you tried to do, but the urge never lasted long, because the truth was, I didn't need him to know. I just needed to know that I knew. And I did. One day, about 3 weeks in, I received a letter. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting, his. It was short, no apology, no questions, just, I guess it's yours after all. No mom. No signature, just that. I folded it up, tucked it into a drawer with old recipes and dried wildflowers. Not as a keepsake, just a reminder of what happens when people believe your silence means surrender. It doesn't. It means calculation. It means you were watching, listening, preparing. About a month later, I walked into a small-town cafe for breakfast. The woman at the counter was younger than me, probably early 40s. She had a bruise on her arm and a quiet way of speaking, like she was trying not to take up space. I asked for black coffee. She handed it to me with a small smile. "You new around here?" she asked. "Just getting started," I said. We talked, just a little, but enough for me to see the shape of something familiar. A woman who gave too much for too long, who stayed quiet too often, who maybe needed someone to remind her that invisibility is not a requirement of kindness. That afternoon, I started a new folder on my desk. Fund application. Working title, The Quiet Claim. A small grant program for women over 50 who've been financially manipulated or pushed out by family. No big logos, no interviews, just quiet help, quiet strength. By winter, it would be real. Ethan didn't know about it. He didn't need to, because this wasn't about him anymore. It was about building something from the ashes of everything I let burn on purpose. And one day, if he ever did find out, I hope he realizes I didn't punish him. I just stopped making him the center of my story. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't matter anymore? Like your years of giving could be rewritten, replaced, or handed off without a thank you? If you've ever experienced that quiet kind of heartbreak, I see you. And if you're ready to take back your space, even in silence, I want to hear your story. Share in the comments. You don't have to shout to be strong. Sometimes the quietest steps echo the loudest.